Donna? Yeah, I think we have an idea. We can just change the times. What's the matter? Is that Matthew? Matthew. You are on 550. Yeah. All right, Karen. Whenever you are ready. And welcome everybody to the Thursday, September 14th, 2023 Webster Town Board Workshop. Say 3 agenda items tonight. First one is a presentation actually by Jared Hurt regarding our current, I guess it's slide helicopter law we have in town that's been around for 15 years. Jared, I'm going to hand the time to you.
17 years, 5 months, and 9 days.
Okay.
Hey, no one's thank you. My name is Jared Hurt. I'm with Evans Fox. Presentation tonight is I've handed out the packet to all the members of the board. The objective is to repeal the aircraft airports in heliport town law, or otherwise amend the local law to provide the aggrieved residents with an avenue to obtain a special use permit or some similar relief. The issue is that as the law sits today, there is an outright prohibition against landing or taking off a helicopter and various other aircraft, or having a heliport or airport within the town of Webster. There is absolutely positively no avenue for any resident to seek any form of relief from that specific provision in the town code. Now, what I've provided the members or board members with is it's a packet with various exhibits. I just want to walk everyone through. I figured that would be the most efficient way to do it. Exhibit A is really just a map of Monroe County. There are 19 towns located within Monroe County. Not one town aside from Webster has an outright prohibition on a heliport or the takeoff or landing of private helicopters within the town. In fact, 17 of the 19 towns in Monroe County don't even have the word helicopter or heliport within their town code. So, as previously mentioned, this law has been on the books now for about 17 and a half years. And clearly, no other town within Monroe County has felt it necessary to enact any similar legislation. Exhibit B is a copy of the actual law itself for the members of the board, which I really provided that for your convenience to see that there is in fact no avenue for any resident to pursue any form of relief within the 4 corners of the code itself. Exhibit C, what I provided to everybody was there is a process through a special use permit process through the town board, sections 269:18 through 269:27 of the Webster Town Code. The point of me providing that is to show evidence that there already is something in existence within the town code that allows the town board to a process for which to hear special use permits. What we're really asking for is if the town board in its review of this law doesn't find it appropriate to repeal the law or amend it in some substantive way, that they at least provide some mechanism for relief. And what I'm saying is that that process already exists. We just need the town code as it pertains to helicopters and heliports to provide that avenue so that we can avail ourselves to go before the town board and seek a special use permit. Now, again, we're not asking for, right now, for the town board to grant relief allowing this to happen. If the town board says, hey, we're going to allow any applicant that feels they're aggrieved to come before the town board and seek a special use permit, well then there's all sorts of safeguards and mechanisms that the town board can review, and they're already provided for within your own code to make sure that the applicant or the aggrieved party is meeting the requirements and standards that you as the town board and the town code provide for. Along those lines, what I provided were copies of the town code regarding the communications towers and solar energy. And I did that because those are hot button issues in almost every town around the state. Communications towers, almost all towns have really provided a special use permit process, which you have, and it's specifically provided within the sections of the town code as they pertain to communications towers, and the same thing with solar energy, solar farms. Those items or those types of industries and development would otherwise be prohibited outright without having that mechanism for the aggrieved parties to go forward. Now, really why we're all here, right, is because, or at least why I'm here, is because there's a property within the town of Webster that is like no other property. And that property, everything is set forth on Exhibit D. I provided a Google Earth photo of the property, and the first one, there's a black X in the right-hand corner of that photograph depicting the subject property that we're all talking about, 893 Dewitt Road. And that photo depicts how unique this property is, in the sense that it abuts 104 on one side, it has bay on the far northern side. It sits on a huge parcel, 27.5 acres is controlled by the same landowner. So it's such a unique parcel in the sense of being able to have it utilized as a heliport and with a takeoff and a landing of helicopter, yet there's no mechanism, no avenue for him to go forward and seek relief from the code. The next page that I have provided under that exhibit is a printout of Monroe County, and it's a reflection of the tax parcels. And again, it's just to memorialize and show how unique this property is in the sense of there's a lot of acres there, 27.5 acres that are controlled by this landowner. It abuts 104. It abuts the Irondequoit Bay. Nobody else in the town of Webster can present those same facts. Going forward in the photos that I provided, there's just actual photos of the subject property. The first one is just looking at the property from DeWitt Road. The next one is looking down, which shows the overpass for 104, which abuts the property. The next one is the 104 itself, which is what you see if you were to walk the property line and look through the fence. And then the next photos I think are really telling, which show what you see from this property when you look out the vast land that is there, and the fact that this individual resident can take off and land from his property without ever flying over anyone else's property. He can leave the town of Webster without going over anyone else's property. Again, I don't know any other resident that could state that, but there's no relief for him to seek in the way that the code is currently written. And lastly, what I provided was Exhibit E, which is just further documentation that, so the flight, once an aircraft is in the air, is governed by the Federal Aviation Administration. The FAA has approved this facility as a heliport. Now, I can throw that out to you and show you that because, again, I don't know any other property in the town of Webster that can make that statement. So I would like to thank the members of the board for their time, and if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer. Again, we're just asking for your kind consideration in looking at the code. And this particular provision, like I said, is 17.5 years old, and there's no relief for the residents to seek to you as the board to say, hey, I need some relief. I'm an aggrieved party. How can I do this? It doesn't exist. Are there any questions from any member of the board? Supervisor, yes.
Yeah, Jared, it's just kind of a combination comment, question. The handout that you brought in for everybody,
Yes.
we will be uploading this to our website and
Yes.
to our social media platforms. Like we upload all the presentations we do.
Yes.
So that'll be up there for everybody to see. And also the tape of this for anybody not watching live at home or in the audience. Your last exhibit and I appreciate this is going back almost 20 years ago. Is this the property on DeWitt, or is this in Bluffs, an old property that?
It is the property I do it. And it's still current.
Huh, okay. And I know it, obviously it expired in January of '07.
Yeah, it's been renewed ever since. My point of showing you that exhibit was that that's been in existence now for 18 years.
I don't mean to nitpick, and obviously tonight is presentation purposes only. There is
Yes.
no, I mean, if we went forward with anything on this, and Charlie, I'll defer to you, and using Jared's repeal, amend, special use permit. Any one of those avenues in the future, I'm guessing we have public hearing aspects, writing up what the proposal is, all that stuff.
There would be a change in the law, yes.
Now, and I don't mean to nitpick something, but I mean, how can I can't tell, this is Sundance Trail, this last 2 pages. I mean, like I said here, this is gonna be up there for the world to see.
So
Tell me on these 2 pages how I can see that this is the site. Where's the tax ID number, the DeWitt?
DeWitt H042, if you look at the facility name.
DeWitt H, okay.
So if you look under the, and again, just, this is almost wholly irrelevant to anything the town has to do. But with that being said, if you look at the facility name on the first page, in the, call it quarter of the way down, see where it says proposal, associated city, facility name?
Yeah, the DeWitt H, whatever.
DeWitt H, that's-
That Bluffs, which I know Sundance Trail is in the Bluffs.
So,
So is this for 2 locations?
yes, at the time, but it's
Gotcha.
only 893 DeWitt currently.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, and that's just to establish and to show to the board that the FAA, who governs the flight paths and the flights of aircraft, has approved this facility. That doesn't mean that this is binding on the town. I'm not saying that. I'm just showing you as further evidence as to how unique this particular parcel is. That's the point of showing that. And yet, we have this unique parcel that by all accounts, our position is should be able to be utilized, and there's no ability for us to seek any relief given the current code. So I can't emphasize that enough. We're not asking the town board right now to grant any relief. I mean, what you indicated, Tom, sure, if there's any change to the town code, subject to a public hearing. And at that point in time, we have a whole presentation which gets into a lot of different other facts. What the purposes of tonight, the goal and the objective was to try to stimulate the town board into saying, hey, I'm thinking, this code's been out there now for 17 and a half years. We have at least one aggrieved resident, perhaps more, who don't have an avenue to get any relief. That's not fair.
Any other?
No,
Any?
appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you.
All right, appreciate it.
Kept it quick so you can watch the game.
That's right. All right, so actually, Matthew, we're a little ahead of schedule. Next up is an update from the Webster Economic Development Alliance Executive Director, Matt Chatfield, on the activities going on at the Alliance.
Yeah.
Does the board mind if I stay seated? So, thank you very much for having me here today. Just a quick overview of WEDA. It is the public-private partnership for economic development in the community. 5 key members: town, village, school district, Chamber of Commerce, and the Business Improvement District created the organization back in 2014. And the overall strategic focus of the organization is what we call the 4 R's: resources, relationship, retention, and recruitment. Those are the things that we focus on a regular basis, as well as, strategic projects within the community. So I'm going to give a quick update on some of the strategic projects we have currently taking place, both within the town and the village. I think also understanding what's going on in the village is good context for the town board to understand, is we're all one community and we all tend to try and work together towards common goals. Over the past several years, we've had quite a bit of success as a partnership. Over $10 million of funds have come in to the community, mostly in the form of grant funds. And that amounts to about $18.74 for every dollar that's been contributed to the organization itself from the 5 members. So our return on investment as a community is very good from an economic development perspective, and we continue to seek funds and bring those funds into the community. Some of the key projects that are on the map in front of you include Sandbar Park. That is a signature project within the town of Webster. The project itself is largely the product of efforts from the Alliance. To be as frank as possible, the Alliance brought in the original $118,000 for design and engineering back in 2015, and then that resulted in additional funds being brought in for construction. Currently, we stand at about $4.6 million of grant funds in the door for a projected $11 million project, of which phase 1 was roughly $8 million. As we're going to look at that one a little bit more in particular. Funding secured to date, $4.6 million on Sandbar. And where do we stand on that project? What's next? If the town is to continue on with phase 2 of the project, it's the environmental education area. Right now, roughly $1.6 to $1.8 million projected for that project as of right now, but it still needs to go through the final design process. So next steps for the town would be to hire professional designers, engineers, landscape architects to finalize the design and come up with a final cost estimate. That project is being done in conjunction in partnership with the school district. There are funds earmarked from the sale of the Basket Road Stadium facility, roughly $324,000 plus or minus, and that has been earmarked towards the environmental education area. So there's already a small chunk of funds that we believe would go towards that project. Development of an advisory committee, how we can have a better town-school relationship for the programming and of that facility, and potentially the operation of it. And then, of course, additionally, at Sandbar Park is the future of potential restaurant facility on the property. And the future of that is, we decided, I believe, sometime probably in the next calendar year. West Webster Hamlet is another focus area of the Webster Economic Development Alliance, and it has been a focus of the town board for quite a significant amount of time over the past several years, I would say. Where we stand now is we've secured funding and have finalized a master plan for that project. The overall study was $100,000, and Josh Artuso gave you an update on that project, I would say 5 to 6 weeks ago. And then truly the next steps on that are to finalize coordination with Monroe County on the future of 600 Ridge Road. So we're diligently working with the town to try and identify a path forward to both mitigate the issues there and bring that project and that property back onto the tax rolls and being positively, contributing positively to the town of Webster and the Hamlet. And there are some zoning recommendations as well as some code enforcement recommendations that were made as part of that study. So those would be next steps for the town board if they wanted to continue on the path towards implementation of that master plan for the Hamlet. And then, of course, it's my responsibility to go out and continue to try and identify sources of funding to implement all these wonderful ideas. Moving eastward, we have quite a substantial amount of time and effort over the past, I would say, 9 years and counting, in a coordination effort with the Xerox Corporation on the future of its campus. As we all know, there are several portions of the campus, sizable portions, that have been deactivated. There's empty buildings, vacant land. And Xerox as a corporation has decided to come to the table and be a partner in future planning and revitalization of its campus. And they are a partner within a master planning process that is being led by the village. The village was awarded $203,000 in funds from the Department of State. And we are currently undertaking a master planning effort for that area in yellow, boundary box, that does cross into the town of Webster. It includes the town's recreation center, some lands along the flows road. The supervisor and Josh Artuso have both been, and both are, continue to be a part of the advisory committee for this project. And this is a master planning effort, so this is not a hard capital construction project yet. The goal is, how do we identify the future vision for this? Where does it fit within the community? How do we go about understanding the potential ramifications for changes in land use in this area, as well as development intensity, and understanding how they impact all things even related to transportation as well. So there's a host of issues that we're hoping to provide recommendations for that come out of this, including land use changes, development intensity, transportation recommendations, and some general public policy recommendations as well. Next steps for that project are that consultants will prepare and finalize that master plan, hopefully to be done by the end of this calendar year. WIDA is also in the process of identifying a list of usual suspects, likely developers and investors, to invite to a forum. It'll be an invite-only forum on the prospects of development investment in this location. As part of this master planning effort, we have conducted a market analysis. We've hired economists and economic development specialists and real estate specialists to conduct an economic analysis. And one of the findings is that this area could support 1,000 housing units over the next 5 years. New housing units, approximately 40% of rental units and 60% owner-occupied. So there is a driving market for housing within the study area, and part of the master planning process is to identify, are there any appropriate areas that could be converted to a residential use? Or are there areas that should just remain industrial? So that's part of that master planning. Also in the village, downtown revitalization continues to be a primary goal of what we hope to accomplish within the Webster Economic Development Alliance. If we go back 8 years to 2015, the Alliance was successful in obtaining private monies from CoBank, from the Weather Channel, from Xerox Corporation, from Frontier Communications. We obtained about $50,000 in private money. We generated a community investment strategy. It was like the Alliance's version of the town's comprehensive plan, mostly on private investment. Where should we be investing in our community? There's 6 real big topic areas. The top focus area within the community, based on 6 months of public outreach, was downtown revitalization. Residents across the town and village wanted to see a revitalized village center. The second most important area was a revitalized waterfront. Third most important topic area was productive open space and recreational resources for families. And then after that, an industrial center that will create jobs and economic opportunity. So since 2015, I would say that we've been largely ticking those things off of that list. We've been focusing on downtown revitalization, been focusing on waterfront revitalization, been focusing on industrial development, and we've been focusing on parks, recreation, and those community development services that make Webster a great place to live. Moving forward for downtown revitalization, there is a grant opportunity for the village. Currently, New York State has created a $4.5 million program where if the community devises a strategy for private and public investment, these are actual investment dollars. If you come up with a good enough plan and they like it, they will help fund it. Last year, we submitted an application on behalf of the village in a small area. It was mostly on Main Street, and we made it to the finals. We were actually one of the final 8. They selected 3 communities for awards, but we made it to the final 8 for interviews. So we have a very good chance this year. So we're revising our application as we speak. That will be submitted on the 29th of September. So the notice of award for that, those funds would likely come back in 2024. And where this aligns with that prior project, that Reimagine Webster project, is that it overlaps. So now we're talking about implementation dollars for recommendations that we're currently just finalizing within the master planning process. So we're really trying to almost take on projects, 2 projects at multiple levels simultaneously, but aligning ourselves to really make things happen sooner rather than later. Another project, right? The list just keeps going on and on. We have a lot going on within the Webster Economic Development Alliance. The Community Access Project at Xerox. We've been talking about this one for several years now. In coordination with Xerox, the Village of Webster is exploring taking public dedication of some private roads. Currently, we have about $1.838 million towards the rehabilitation of those roadways prior to them or just after them entering into the public domain. It would be foolish on behalf of the public sector to take private roads that are in massive states of disrepair and then rely on the very local, small delegation of 5,000 residents in the Village of Webster to rehab them on behalf of the major corporation in the community. It doesn't make sense. We all agree on that. We're just trying to identify a path forward. If we can make this happen, right? If we can bring these roads into the public domain and help facilitate development of the private sector for a major redevelopment site in Webster. There's an 88-acre site directly across the street from the Webster Recreation Center that is the focus of that Reimagine Webster initiative, that $203,000 master plan effort. So there's a lot of time, effort, and resources going into the future of this small portion of our community, but we feel that it is what we call a catalytic opportunity, right? This is a catalyst for future private development. So we're still awaiting potential matching funds from the federal government. We requested $4 million. We have been given a preliminary anticipation that an award of $500,000 could be awarded from the federal government, but that all is pending on federal legislation. We're continuing to work together, the town, the village, WIDA, and Xerox with Monroe County, because Monroe County is also planning on undertaking massive improvements to Phillips Road, which goes right through this whole master planning effort. So we've had multiple meetings talking about the future of that corridor and how it relates to the future of this portion of our community. And I'm going to end with a bigger picture, right? We have maybe two more slides here that talk about the bigger picture of what's going on in the industrial portion of our community. Many years ago, I coined the term the Northeast Area for Technology, NEAT, our NEAT zone. It's a 1,500-acre plus or minus industrial zone within our community. It crosses both the town and village boundary. It extends largely from Route 250 at the very southwestern extent in the village and continues all the way to our Fairlife project, essentially. Just east or just west of County Line Road. That is the industrial zone within our community. But currently that industrial zone is bisected. There's really 2 separate zones. There's a yellow box that mostly focuses on Basket Road. And then there's the green zone, which focuses mostly on what we would consider the Xerox campus, right? The Xerox campus that extends mostly between Phillips and Salt Roads with some appendages on either side. These areas are, although it's all zoned uniformly, these areas are distinct, they are not connected via any sort of infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, other than Route 104. So the vision, the larger vision, is to create a unified transportation corridor from Route 250 to Basket Road, utilizing almost entirely roads that are currently in existence today. Mitchell Dean, the largest extent of which is currently private. I think the long-range goal would be for that to be rehabilitated and brought into the public domain. And the actual, to make this vision come to fruition, there are two small extension projects. One on the west that would bring Chowda Drive and a new gateway into the town's recreation center out to Route 250, currently on land owned by the town, and a small extension of Bolter Industrial Parkway west to Salt Road. That project we've heard a lot about recently because the Fairlife project itself has made that small connection more timely. Right now, the time is more of the essence to see if we can bring that connection to fruition. A lot of this slide just talks about the infrastructure that's going on in Basket and Salt Road corridor. Everybody's very familiar with what's going on in this corridor. But I would like to point out that the investments that are taking place within the public infrastructure of this corridor are not merely focused on one singular project. These investments will go a long way towards making this entire Basket and Salt Road area much more viable for long-term economic development. The Fairlife project is a wonderful standalone project within our community. And yes, there will be some infrastructure that will be upgraded because of it. But it will not be only to the benefit, in the long run, of just the Fairlife project. I think we have a large 85-acre site currently owned by Xerox. We have a 20-acre site owned by Paychex. We have property that's currently owned by Tessie Corporation. We have a lot of economic opportunity in this area. And what we are undertaking now is planning for the future to determine how much of that opportunity we can bring into reality. Just a quick understanding of that Bolter Parkway industrial extension, brings that road right through some Xerox lands. We are currently identifying a path forward with Xerox on how we can make that a reality. So then what's the next on that particular roadway extension project? Well, the next steps would be for the town to hire a design engineer. The town and the school to finalize that transfer process, because there's also lands of the school district that would be involved. Surveying the corridor as part of the design process. And lastly, it is the Economic Development Alliance's intention very soon to submit funding to support the engineering and the survey components of that project. So all of those soft cost efforts of part one of a longer term process. Our goal is to submit a request to the state to fund those costs. And lastly, I'm ending on the big picture, right? We started off small, we talked about a lot of singular projects, but it's always good to take that step back and really understand how all of this connects and works together. Over the past several years, our NEAT zone, this Northeast Area for Technology, has identified several large areas for economic opportunity within our community. We have them numbered 1 through 7 on here. Sites ranging from 88 acres to 43 acres to 120 acres. Right? They run the gamut of potential projects for investment. A good portion of them are owned by Xerox Corporation, and it is the continued partnership with Xerox Corporation that will hopefully allow us to continue to submit these projects for large site selectives within the community, similar to that we did for Fairlife, working with our partners at the Greater Rochester Enterprise to bring large-scale investment and job creation into our community. So, with that, I will open it up to questions from the board.
And how many people are on staff at WIDA?
The staff of WIDA consists of one executive director.
Sleep at night?
I wake up often in the middle of the night thinking about things.
this undertaking.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on, but it's largely because there's a lot of opportunity within our community. And it would be foolish for us to sit back and not at least explore these opportunities, because there really is. It's unique.
Nice work, good work in putting this together, because you've shown, anybody who wants to know to see exactly what's going on.
And the reasons,
You put it all in one,
and the
you
reasons
put it all
we
in
are,
one, basically one pamphlet, I don't know if you did it.
and the reasons we're undertaking what we're doing. There's a very coherent process here. There's just not enough staff resources to waste time on projects. We've identified to do this.
Good,
Great work.
good job.
It goes back to the case for business phase of Webster Chamber of Commerce, when we created those master plans, if you will, but now what you've done is taken it to actionable steps. And, it's great, good work.
It's not so much a question as a comment, because since I am one of the board members of WIDA, and actually the last, I think, 20 months I've been a president of the board, those 20 months has been, that's the difference of a relationship between Matt and myself, who is the executive director and president. And especially in the last couple of months, as we try to get together in the morning before the workday starts, to talk about WIDA specific things, how to maybe grow it, to your point, one employee, this and that. The problem that Matt and I run into at those meetings is that there's so much going on that we tend to start talking granularly about these projects. We look up, an hour and 15 minutes has gone by, and we really haven't talked about WIDA and what we're trying to do with structure, so that, can you imagine that? Yeah, and I gotta take the blame for that.
Well, I don't let my toast get cold. Maybe your Tom's eggs get cold, but
Yeah.
I eat.
But it just, there's so many things going on here.
It's great to see the progression through the years that you've accomplished, that WIDA has accomplished also. And I remember 2013 Village of Webster, that was pretty huge. So, every year you're building upon previous year's success, so, congratulations.
Well, this puts everything together in one place.
It really
If
does.
somebody wanted to come in who was totally
Right.
unfamiliar with
What's going on in Webster? Here
they
it
can
is.
go through this thing in an hour and see exactly what's going on, where it's going.
Right.
Yeah, this is a good piece of work. And of course, congratulations to you for all the money you've raised and everything else. That goes without saying. But this is a good presentation.
Grants follow the good projects.
It was nice to see you at the farmer's market on Wednesday, it was a couple of weeks ago. I'm glad you had that booth there, and there were a number of people that stopped over and asked a lot of very, very good questions, including myself. And, thank you for being
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, man.
And Donna, we're 3 minutes ahead of schedule. Well, our last item of the night is the Webster Assessor to the Stars, Donna Comar. And some things that we've heard about last year. Well, I'll hand it on to
So what did you want to say?
you. No, these items you're gonna talk about, we did talk about last year. Actually, one of them, the fire volunteers, we voted on, but it's a fluid world and there's changes, and here you are to explain it to us.
Yeah, okay, so I guess I have a PDF in front of me. I don't know how it looks on the screen. I could pull up the PowerPoint
It
and
looks
be
great.
larger. Can everyone see it all right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, we'll rock and roll with this. Thank you for having me. I wanted to refresh things because, we were here recently to talk about legislative changes to an exemption being made available in Monroe County only for volunteer firefighters and ambulance workers.
This one I have tagged Take Two, like in Hollywood, because we get to do it again so soon. This is going to be my topic at the fall conference because now this is statewide. So my presentation to you this evening is that we have a current law. Per state statute, real property tax law 466-K, which was specific to Monroe County municipalities at local option, and Webster did adopt that option in February 28, 2022. That allows a 10% exemption for the primary residence of certain volunteers for fire and ambulance, and they must have at least 2 years of service, live within the municipality that is served by the district for which they serve. The service duration is certified by the district for which they serve. And we also adopted a lifetime exemption option back in February of 22. That is 20 or more years of service will be honored if the service was somewhere in Monroe County. So if someone moves from another municipality, has 20 or more years of service, what Webster is saying is we'll welcome you to our community and continue to provide you with that exemption because we are offering the lifetime exemption. If they're under 20 years, they must live here and serve here. But let's just say somebody wanted to move from another part of Monroe County into Webster and they already had 20 years of experience, we would honor that exemption and continue it for them, now that they are becoming a Monroe County or a Webster town resident.
But below that it said, I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure,
Below
absolutely.
that it said, would be honored if the service was in Monroe County.
That's what I'm saying. Yep.
Okay.
So you have to get to 20 or more years before it's service outside of the municipality and the district for which they serve. Okay? So a Northeast Joint Fire District firefighter who's a volunteer who lives in the town of Webster would be able to live anywhere in the town of Webster, not necessarily in the Northeast Joint Fire District, and get the exemption that you approved, 10%. Because Northeast Joint Fire District serves the municipality of Webster. So we offer that to that service person, volunteer, okay? If there was somebody who was working for another municipality, I don't know where all the volunteer firefighters are, but let's just say Charlotte, okay? And they have 20 years or more of experience there in service, but then they want to retire and they want to move to Webster. If they have 20 years experience in Chile, we will honor that here in Webster. That's what
But not if they're in Wayne County.
none if they're in Wayne
Okay,
County.
that's what I was going, okay.
Okay, yep. Another part of the county is what I was trying to say. So the legislation, now what is happening is that there's a new statute, and it's Real Property Tax Law 466-A. And right now, there are actually two readings of that. One is in existence from being the original volunteer firefighters and ambulance workers exemption. But what has happened is, over time, these exemptions have been written, 1 or 2 counties at a time, and there are 11 existing similar, but not identical, sort of exemptions for firefighters and ambulance workers that are volunteering their time to serve their community. On December 9th of 2025, it was signed by the governor that there should be one. And what happens is all of those 11 existing similar statutes, one of which is Part K, ours for Monroe County, will be repealed. It's going to disappear. And unless the town board does something, and unless Monroe County and whoever else has already approved it, actually the fire district has to approve it as well to offer a discount on their tax line on the bill. The exemptions will disappear, and so I'm here to ask you to continue it forward. I know 2025 seems like a long time away, but I'm going to get to why I'm asking you now. So if the taxing jurisdictions do nothing before that repeal date, the exemptions will cease. It will replace all those existing exemptions that now serve 20 counties with one common language statewide for all 62 counties in New York State. It requires the same action taken by the taxing jurisdictions as recently done. We did that last February to conform to the new state statute. The new legislation reads this way. you're gonna see it looks very, very familiar. Allows up to 10% for primary residence. The key word there is up to, because some of those were not offering 10%. Ours was offered at 10%, no options, you can't take the 10% or not approve the exemption. Others of those 11 other statutes read 5%. So now the new statute reads up to 10%. Technically, you have an option to reduce that 10%, because the new statute does read up to 10% exemption. And again, the same thing for the years of service. I would just call your attention to the minimum years now are somewhere between 2 and 5. And again, that comes from historically the other exemptions that have been approved under different statutes that were not available in Monroe County varied on how many years of minimum service you needed. By the time they got around to writing the one for Monroe County, it was given to us as minimum 2 years service. You must live in the municipality that is served by the district for which they serve. The service duration is certified by the district for which they serve. All that's very similar, very exactly the same actually. And it provides for a lifetime exemption option, local option, which you've already adopted. The new part is below. It provides an additional provision for continuation of an exemption to an unremarried spouse of a member with at least 5 years of service that is killed in the line of duty in this capacity as a volunteer firefighter or ambulance worker. That is a local option. So that is something that you will need to consider new and afresh, and that is to continue a benefit. They must already be receiving the exemption, and it would go to the spouse as long as that spouse is unremarried if the volunteer is killed in the line of duty. The second provision that would be new that you need to apply some thought to is that it would provide an additional provision for, again, continuation of an exemption under different circumstances. It would be to the unremarried spouse of a member with at least 20 years of service. Again, you would need to approve that provision if you so desire. Any questions on the difference between the two laws? So here's an update on why I'm here today. On May 9th, 2023, Monroe County adopted that new language to replace their portion of the real property tax law 466K specific. So now the assessor's office will be administering 466A for county purposes. It'll be easier for all of our residents, the people who are receiving these exemptions and such, if all the rules were the same. They preserved their option for lifetime exemption, which was exactly the same that you have offered. And they also adopted the 2 unremarried spouse provisions to continue benefits under those circumstances. So your options today. Today it's a discussion, so today I'm asking you if you would like to consider it further to set a public hearing. Your options are by March 1st of 2024. Of course, you can do nothing. If you do nothing, I suggest that you do revisit it before the expiration date, but you don't have to do anything today. Second option is to review the options and adopt the new language to preserve the existing exemptions and or offer those new options. Or you can revisit the whole thing in a future meeting. And again, I would recommend that you do it before it expires on December 9th, 2025. If you don't do anything for the same assessment role that the Monroe County has already adopted theirs, it just becomes a little bit difficult to explain to people why they might get a provision that the county offers that we don't offer. I suggest that it would be a minimal impact because it would be for the unremarried surviving spouse. Otherwise, it conforms exactly the same as the other. I would anticipate that you would leave the exemption level at 10% and the minimum years at 2 as it's already been adopted. The question is for the unremarried spouses. So it's not urgent except for the 1 or 2 people that might apply to. I can think of one. Any questions I can answer? No, you did a great job. Thank you.
Do you want to roll right into the 2 new ones?
Do you want to take a resolution and continue this thought? Or is that what you're saying?
Well, I think
I have two other exemptions to discuss with you.
Right. Now, when you get to our options, number 2, review the options. That would be, let's do a public hearing, and let's get this new law put in now. I don't have any problems with that, because I have a lot of reasons I don't have any problems with it. Does anybody have a problem with us moving forward with this now?
No.
And you want the public hearing notice has to be in the paper like 5 days before. So we put it in the Webster Herald, let's say for the Wednesday the 20th. We would do the public hearing at the 28th. That's a workshop.
That would be entirely up to the board.
And I don't have a problem doing it at a workshop. Does the board have a problem doing it at a workshop, the public hearing on this? Doesn't sound like they do. All right, well, in that case, can I make a motion to set a public hearing concerning legislative changes to the volunteer firefighters and ambulance workers exemption RPTL 466A, and to have that public hearing notice advertised in the Webster Herald's Wednesday, September 20th, 2023 edition, and the public hearing to be held on Thursday, September 28th at 5:30 p.m. in the Webster Town Board meeting room. That is my motion.
Second.
Supervisor Flaherty?
Aye?
Councilman Cahill? Councilwoman May? Councilwoman DeKalb? Councilman Abbott?
Aye.
All right,
Thank you.
moving along.
Yeah, that was the easy one. That was the easy one.
Okay,
All right, so I've been here a couple of times. This is going to be, I think, the third time in 12 months to discuss the senior citizens exemption, which is not STAR. So I call that 467. That's the statute from which it is derived. There's an income portion to that exemption, and it usually mirrors, and this time it still is mirroring, the same definition of exemption for income, for disabled persons with limited income, and that's real property tax law 459C for all the attorneys watching today. So but before I go into why I'm here for the new thing, let me just remind you, I was here in September 8th of 22, and also January 12th, and we discussed the option to adjust the income limits for 2 exemptions. I believe there was a full board at that time, so we talked a lot about the limits. There's a sliding scale that's available. That is not today's discussion, but the board did not take any action on it at that time. Keep in the back of your minds, and I will draw a conclusion later. I'm just laying the breadcrumbs right now. That is something that you still can entertain. We talked about the limited income senior citizen, not to be confused with STAR, and the disabled persons with limited income. We reviewed those basic qualifications for each of those programs. You can refer to those dates on the town's website for those town board meeting dates if you would like to refresh your memory at home. We reviewed the board's authority to set the income limitations for town purposes within the limitations that are found in the statutes. That has not changed. The statute is the same. We also discussed the effects of the increase of the income level. We did a little speculating at that time. We talked about the difficulty of predicting that impact on taxable value and tax rate. We now have data, and that's why I wanted to refresh back onto this topic just ever so slightly at the beginning of this presentation. It does require separate and distinct public hearings to amend the existing laws, because even though the statutes mirror, they are separate statutes. So separate and distinct public hearings are needed when we address these topics, even though I often talk about them at the same time. Results from the 2023 roll. You may recall we have 5 deciding tax jurisdictions found on the Webster assessment roll for these 2 exemptions. Monroe County adopted on January 10th of last year the new state maximum of $58,400 on their income limit sliding scale. The other 4 took no action at that time, and I told you that I would come back and give you an idea of what the impact was from when the county increased their limits. And here it is. The results are that Monroe County increased their maximum income from $37,400 to $58,400, which is the state's maximum allowed by the statute. The town's current maximum is at $34,400. They received 243 new approvals above and beyond the prior year. Some of that might be attributable to people becoming age eligible that were not previously age eligible. But in conjunction with that, they raised the income limits. I'm just telling you the difference between the two roll years at a $17,819,836 assessment being taken off of the taxable part of the roll and pushed to other taxpayers. That's an assessment, so you can apply a tax rate to that. Full value, that would translate to about $30 million. It's a very generous program. So how did I come up with that number? Here's a little bit of a history. Can you see my mouse when I roll over this? Okay, great. This is a 4-year analysis of the exemptions that were granted. Looking at roll year 2020, 2021, 22, and 23. Now people might say, but you're in 23. Yes, that's the one that we just finished up in July, and the calendar year does not follow the assessment roll year. The income year is at the top in red, and that lags by 2 years from the roll year. So in 2020, we were looking at income from 2018. And if you follow across the top line, you'll see that the county had approved a number of exemptions. We approved 536 at that time, and the exempt value for assessment terms at that time was 26 million, round numbers. In 2021, we were looking at the 19 income. We had 550. That's typical to increase because our people are aging into the program. People do move and people do pass away. So there's always the pluses and minuses, just like your home checkbook. That was 37 million at the time. In 2022 assessment roll, we're looking at the 2020 income. That was a time when people were home. There was the incentive programs for staying at home. There was an extra benefit given for unemployment, etc. It's a few years ago, we may recall that. What we saw was a huge increase in people's income, even in the senior citizen population, and the numbers dropped to 450, and the value that was being exempted dropped to 22 million. Then, on the 2023 roll, even though we're looking at the 2021 still COVID income year, the county increased their limits from 37.4 to 58.4, and we approved 693 applications, up from 450 the prior year, with 40 million. That's a difference of the blue lines for the smaller numbers compares that year to the prior year. So you see the increase of 14, the decrease of 100, and then the jump again to 243. That's on the county line. If you'd like to jump down, you can see the town line, just one line below that. And we did not have that experience because you did not change the income limits. I think that you'll find as the presentation goes on, that was a crystal ball moment, because the new definition, by its own definition of what it's including and no longer including in the definition of income, is in effect raising the income limit, and more people will qualify. How many questions at this point for the history part?
So the town had 394 approved exemptions in 2023 for 17 million at our current equalization rate. Okay. Maybe it's later in the presentation. We're at 34,000 as our count. If we had gone to that 58,000, do you think that we would have had 700 approvals and this 17 million would have been at our equalization rate 40 or 50 million?
likely, yes.
Okay.
Our increase and our difference in taxable value going from a prior of a lower than the county to the full maximum would have been a greater differential,
Right.
actually, yes.
Okay.
Because they, if I go back to this slide, they started at 37.4, we were 3,000 below that.
Okay.
So you'd have that gap to make up as well. This slide is for you, Tommy, I know you like numbers.
Well, I mean, you know, in our equalization rate, there's $3.6 billion, or whatever this is.
Yeah, down at the bottom, I put the rolls taxable, thank you for pointing that out.
You know, every 36 million that you exempt at 1%, it doesn't lower the tax levy by 1%. It pushes it out to the rest of the taxpayer.
Right, and if you have a large enough shift, it actually changes the tax rate. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So that number at the bottom, the roll, AV, AV is my abbreviation for assessed value, it takes up less space on the screen.
Okay.
Not taxable, that's just the value on the roll. I didn't report the taxable because I want to confuse you, because for each line that you see above there, there's a different taxable value, because everybody gets to shape their exemptions the way that they like to shape it. And there are certain things that apply to the town that might not apply to the school, and vice versa. STAR doesn't apply to the town, veterans exemptions don't apply to the school, so it all adds up differently by the end of the day. On that last page of the roll, it's all adding up different.
Yeah.
So a reminder then about your income limits. Your options for 2024, and again, in order to be on the 2024 assessment roll, that decision must be made and finalized by March 1st of 2024. You can do nothing. You can lower that value on your 50, you get to decide the 50% and the rest gets calculated after it. And you can raise it or you can revisit the question in future years. Here's a reminder of what that sliding scale currently looks like. You have approved at 26,000 for your maximum of 50% exemption. There's no greater exemption than 50%. And the state limit right now is 50,000 at that level. And then you can see how the scale plays out. You don't get to choose each of these steps up to the high number, and I was reporting the highest number to make it easier for people at home to try and think whether they should apply or not apply. 58,000 is what I was reporting, and the 34.4 is what I'm reporting. We always tell them the upper limit. But you have to decide the 50% limit to get there. That makes sense? This is my report to you back in January of what the other towns were planning to do at that time, and most of them decided just to sit tight for a little while. And as it turns out, with this definition now coming down, that you don't have an option of adopting a new definition, but you have some options among that new definition that we need to discuss. So the opportunity before you is to review those limits and also to accept the new mandated limit, or definition, excuse me, I'm trying to make that distinction, to accept the new mandated income definition, or to review, and that next word should be adopt, options in the new definition of income. So, and what you want to do is make sure that it's appropriate for your demographics. I have the presentation if you need it. I'm sure it's on the website for the dates that I put at the beginning of the presentation. We studied the demographics, we studied the census, and we talked about the difficult decision before the board right now, which is that every time you approve an exemption for a particular class of property, the other people who are not part of that class will be making up the difference in the taxes. The town does not go without any taxes. The county would not go without any of those taxes. It's just that you're going to collect it from someone else. Sometimes that difference from a prior decision and a new decision, such as when the county adopted that and it went up that 17.8 million, sometimes that can actually affect the party that you're trying to provide the benefit for, because it might shift the tax rate a little bit if it's sizable enough. When you have a $3 billion assessment roll, it takes a big push to push the needle on the tax rate. There is no way for me to predict that for you because it's so parcel level specific. There is no ceiling on the senior citizens or the disabled income person like there is on the veterans exemption. A 50% exemption of a $1 million house is 50%. They will receive $500,000 non-taxed. A 50% exemption on a $200,000 house will be $100,000 exempt. They each get their bill cut in half. There's no limit on it. New York State Assessors has advocated for a limit. So the legislative changes, are you ready to dive in? The old definition was cumbersome for both the applicant and the staff. It was confusing to the applicant. It was difficult to explain and to administer, and it was very burdened with documented evidence. It was originated in the 60s, and it was band-aided together with all the new ways that the state and the federal government allowed for people to start to save for their own retirements. IRAs have been invented since then. Stocks have changed since then. There's just so much that has happened in the American financial world since then. I think it's time for an overhaul, and their intent was good. All right, let's see how this turned out. The new definition is fresh and it's relatable. It's easier to understand, but make no mistake, it is not simplistic. It is easier to administer, so they tell us, but we have a lot of questions yet left unanswered by the Office of Real Property and Department of Taxation and Finance, who are the ones responsible for helping us administer this new legislation. It does reduce the documented evidence for most income tax filers. The old definition did not follow income tax guidelines. In fact, that was the most lengthy conversations we would have with a lot of people. They'd say, but that's not taxable income. We're not here to file your income tax returns. We're trying to process an exemption application based on income, and that definition is found in real property tax law and a lot of opinions over the decades. So it did not follow those tax guidelines. It was hard for people who are trying to apply for the program to relate to why we needed the information, and it felt invasive. Not fun on our end, but we helped them through all those applications. It included all available income resources to a household. It included non-taxable income such as veterans' disability payments, railroad Social Security equivalents and railroad pensions, workers' compensation, earnings on your IRA accounts. So what you don't give the taxman on your IRA, you just tell them the 1099 and here's my distribution. If I took one, that's what you would give the income tax person to help you prepare your return, or the document you'd be looking at if you file your own return. We're asking for the opposite. We were always asking them to give us their year-end statement of the investments held in an IRA, because we were looking for interest, dividends, and capital gains. And inevitably, they were going back and forth and back and forth. It also included contributions from additional residents in the household, because there was an opinion that decided that if you had an adult child living in your home and they're making contributions to the household, that was income to the senior citizen. It was difficult to explain. It was difficult to gain the support of the applicant. It also omitted depreciation from the income tax return. So when someone was filing an income tax return, our office was charged with restructuring that income tax return, asking for documents that weren't part of that tax return, before we could arrive at a conclusion on what is your income for the purposes of this exemption. The changes. The new, and I'm going to refer to this as the basic mandated definition, the one that you don't have any choice on, is the new basic mandated definition in this slide. It allows localities to adjust not only the income limits, but it also allows you the definition of income to reflect their communities. Because beyond the basic definition, we're going to give you some options. But within the basic, it intends to simplify the process for everyone. One option that they're offering you, however, defies that principle. They will submit completed application, proof of their age and their residency, and their federal tax return and all the 1099s and their Schedule 1 if they file it. Sounds simple. Or, if you don't file an income tax return, the state has offered a worksheet, and you would file the renewal application and your proof of age and your residency along with income worksheet and your 1099s because they don't file the income tax return. It follows federal income tax purposes. It does not look for income that is not found on the income tax return, but one option defies that principle. The new basic mandate definition begins with a federal adjusted gross income. That number is found on both your state and your federal return. It adds into that non-taxable interest and dividends as found on that tax return, line 2A. It includes full Social Security benefits versus the taxable Social Security benefits. Previously, we were always including the full Social Security benefits, so that is consistent. It excludes the IRA distributions. That also is consistent. We never looked at the distributions, but we were charged with finding how much that account had grown, whether or not they had taken it. And then what it does is it limits the losses that are claimed on the income tax return for income tax purposes. That paragraph alone is complicated. The most simple way that I can explain it to you, and this is not an option for us, there are several categories of loss. You can have capital gain loss, you can have business loss, you can have a farm loss. There's several categories of loss. No one category of loss can exceed $3,000, and the sum of those losses cannot exceed $15,000. Now the assessor's office needs to understand how to find losses on the federal income tax return and make sure that each one is limited. The new definition provides flexibility with the local options. Have I confused you yet?
No, these were written by lawyers on.
Yes,
We're gonna come.
all right.
I'm sorry.
The legislative definition of income the starting point is the federal adjusted gross income. Adjustments are possible and two are non-negotiable. As I mentioned, those two are including the tax-exempt interest or dividends found on line 2A of your federal 1040 form, and also the losses that are limited per the statute are not an option. We cannot change those levels and we cannot disallow them. They are limited. The basic mandated definition includes the full Social Security and excludes the IRA distributions. And that is all very lovely, straightforward, sounds simple and wonderful for the applicant and the assessor's office if you're sitting in Albany. And because what happens now is the starting point is written in the statute, the federal adjusted gross income. So if you don't file an income tax return, who will be presenting the assessor the federal adjusted gross income when we cannot mandate that they file an income tax return and we're not charged with calculating it ourselves? Simple, but not
How do you
simplistic.
complete this without that information?
We are continuing, and I will be waiting at bated breath with my list of questions for the
Gotcha.
Department of Taxation and Finance at next month's New York State Assessors Conference. So by definition, the federal adjusted gross income includes deductions and exclusions. You cannot arrive at a starting point without filing, but we cannot compel a taxpayer to file that return. The applicants trying to derive that themselves may omit things because they've never filed, they don't need to file, and you almost need to be a CPA nowadays to complete those applications anyway with the federal government. So we're not really sure what we're supposed to do with that. They did give us a worksheet. I looked at the worksheet, and it doesn't resemble the federal adjusted gross income very strongly. The options that you have before you, however, the local options are, you could opt out of including the full Social Security and then just use the taxable instead. And the reason I deviated from my slide was so that you could now look at this and say, oh, well, we don't want to include full Social Security, that's a bigger number, right? But maybe you do, and I suggest that you do. Because otherwise, every person who applies in our office, who receives Social Security, and I can say confidently it's going to be 95% or more of our applicants are receiving Social Security. The difference would be those who are 65 and first eligible, but maybe not yet receiving their Social Security. That's where that maybe 5% comes in, that might be generous. If they don't file an income tax return, someone's got to tell us what their taxable Social Security would have been. And if the goal of changing this definition was to simplify it for the applicant, please consider that our definition should include the full Social Security. And I will later, through these slides, show you how that's not a detriment to our applicants. Because we've already been including the full Social Security. The people who are already in the program will not see a shift based on that fact. The second option that you have is to opt into including the IRA distributions. We need to think about that very carefully, because while that may sound good in some situations, there are two different kinds of IRAs. This also is a forte of mine, which I teach to the other assessors. IRAs come in two forms. There's a Roth IRA and there's a traditional IRA. Your Roth IRAs will never show on the income tax return. The Roth IRA being a newer investment than the traditional IRA. You pay your taxes in advance, and so it's already been taxed. It will not show on a federal income tax return or a state income tax return, even if you take distributions. So if you are to include IRA distributions, you will only be including those that are traditional IRAs. I would suggest to you, it's possible, that traditional IRAs are going to be found among the older senior citizens, and usually those who are less affluent, because there's a certain income threshold at which people will transfer from a traditional over to a Roth IRA to continue to get certain benefits. So if you were to take that option, you would be penalizing the people with a traditional IRA by including their distributions. You wouldn't even be penalizing them consistently because they don't have a required minimum distribution until 72 now. So they would be getting the exemption starting at age 65, and if they don't begin to take distributions till 72, when they get to 72 and start to take money out of the asset they saved toward their retirement, and now we include it here, their income jumps from that, having that, and that's not consistent for them. So you need to consider that very carefully. The third option is to exclude unreimbursed medical expenses. This is not new. It has been around a very long time. It has never been part of our definition here in Webster on any of our jurisdictions. It was not an option that was ever taken before. And I suggest to you that this is the one thing that defies the goal of simplicity and of using the federal income tax return documents. Not only does that cause people to go back to or to do a cumbersome application project for both the applicant and the staff, but it's fraught with the opportunity for fraud, intentionally or unintentionally, because how could the assessor's staff know the uniqueness of each and every applicant's medical insurance program? And how would we know that they paid for something and got reimbursed if they forgot to show us the reimbursement statement? And while it's not foilable because it would be personal information, do you really want the public to be giving us their personal medical history, their list of medications, what is wrong with them, all that medical information that you would not be able to get if you walked into the hospital and asked them for it, but in order to get a benefit, you'd be asking them to give that to our staff. I don't recommend that. Are you following the options? Okay, the next slide. So a review, this is a cheat sheet I'm going to be handing out to the assessors, a review of the overview of the definition. If you look at the blue items here, this is really how simple it can become when you file an income tax return. Probably 60, maybe 60 or more % of our applicants file an income tax return right now. So many of our applicants will enjoy the simplistic approach compared to the more cumbersome approach that was there before. The mandated without any options is that you will start at the star on line 11, adjusted gross income. You will add in, see the plus sign on line 2A, it's not part of your federal adjusted gross income, it's off to the left. You need to add that in. We would use the basics, or the full Social Security benefits on line 6A, again we're following the blue line, which means you would need to subtract out line 6B because that's part of the federal adjusted gross income. And we would subtract out line 4B, which is the IRA taxable distributions. That would give you the basic definition up to the point of navigating the losses. So that's easy if they file an income tax return, because it's all sitting right there on the return. If you had options, instead of subtracting out the IRA, one option would be to include it. I put a plus sign, but it would be to include it. Social Security, you would use the 6B instead of the 6A, which means you would make no adjustments because it's already part of line 11. Have I learned to navigate a tax return?
That's why I hire an accountant.
I do too. Yes. The legislative definition of income by default is more generous. It eliminates several items that were previously considered as income for the purposes of the two exemptions. And to raise your income limits now would be another layer of generosity. So your income definition options for the 2024 roll, by March 1st of 2024, you can do nothing. And by doing nothing, that is to say that you accept the basic mandated definition. I've checked our town code, because I knew the town attorney would be asking me this question, so in anticipation, we don't need to change anything in our town code the way it was written, because it did not refer in any specific way to how income was defined. It was left into the statute, so it would still be fine, and you don't need to change our town code for either of the exemptions. Another option would be to choose among any of those combinations of options. The options you have, you can couple them up. So while they were trying to simplify, they've given us 3 options. If you take a basic plus 3 options, the mathematical possibilities without repeating any possible combination leaves you with 8 total combinations of options to steer this toward what each community would want. And you can revisit this in future years. This is not your only opportunity. So the 8 possible combinations are here. On my PowerPoint slide, it popped in there. I've numbered them 1 through 8 across the top part of the line, just because I was having fun with this. Charlie's laughing. I put an X over the ones that include the unreimbursed medical expenses because I hope I'm reading your minds correctly to say you don't want us to have all that personal information in our office. Down here is the 2023. Let me blow this one up even further for you. How's that? The 2023 approved applications. So what do I want to show you here? Among those 8 possible combinations, I took 4, being the basic mandate, no options, opting out of including full Social Security, which is to say to use the taxable, and then opting into the IRA, and then the combination of the 2 of them. The staff pulled 200 random existing applications off the roll, off the shelf, excuse me. And we went back and processed these 4 totals. How would it add up for those 200 applications? And I'm going to show you some statistics on the following slide. But this is in comparison to, I'm sorry, I had so many different versions of this trying to simplify it. This is the simplified version. There you are. 2023, including the zeros on here, you can see the sample size is 200. For the town, please read the blue columns. I also did this for the school district. I'll be calling them tomorrow to alert them to the change and ask them if they wish to do anything. So I as long as I have it in front of me, also calculated for the school. The village, if anybody in the village is looking, they match the town, so those statistics would be identical for that. So we've got 3 out of 4 represented right here on this slide. In 2023 assessment roll, the sample size of 200 already approved applications, including all the zeros, was a 22% approval of an exemption. I think I just said that wrong. I didn't say it in the most clear way. If I averaged up all 200 of those lines, some of them are 0, there's a 22% exemption aggregately. The number that was granted was 119 out of the 200. The number of them that were granted at 50% is 66 of that 200. And the average of those that were granted, instead of the ones including zeros, anybody who got an exemption, those 119, 37% is the average exemption of this sample set. Does it make sense? If we go forward, and you see the basic mandate, we have the same sample set, we now would have 142 being granted compared to the 119 on the roll before, the actual approved one. These are speculative if you change the definition. 86 would be now at 50%, and 45% would be your average exemption. By definition, it's more generous. Let that soak in for just a second. If you go to the option, should you decide to take the option of using the taxable Social Security, keeping in mind the administrative cumbersomeness that's going to be reintroduced just on a new topic then for both the applicant and the staff, out of the 200, 191 would be granted some benefit, 179 of them would be at 50%, and 49% would be your average exemption. Most of them are 50% if you take out the full taxable social, or if you take out using the full Social Security. The reason for that is we were always including it before. We were always including it. So to exclude it is to offer a raise. You can see the numbers on the others. I won't walk you through them. I also had to make the assumption that you did not change the income limits going forward, because the purpose of this exercise was just to analyze the impact of the change in definition on a small sample set of our previously approved applications, because we had data on them. Do you have any questions on this?
No.
Okay. So what's next? If the board decides to make any changes to the income limits, or if the board desires to adopt any options found in the new income definition, then a public hearing is required, one for each of these 2 exemptions. Everything that I said while I kept referring to senior citizens is also true of the limited income persons with disabilities. The earlier that your decision is made, the earlier that we can answer the questions for our applicants, which are coming to us daily and who are currently applying.
Donna,
Yes, sir.
I don't know if these are questions or the 3 things that I gleaned from what you just presented. One, you said at the beginning or very early on, the crystal ball-esque of what we did when we did nothing a year ago, okay? Because now this new definition of income, you said by definition it is more generous. And if we start to give some of these local options, it increases the generosity.
Yes.
And third and last but not least, on the last page you showed, we would go from the 17% average granted on the 119 granted to 142 granted, and the average is 45%. And we don't have any choice on that. That's just the use of the.
That is correct.
Well, to me, we don't do anything.
I just want to add that while, depending on which side you're looking at this, we increase our generosity, but we're also increasing the punitive side of that to those who don't qualify and will have to pick up the remainder of the taxes that those who do qualify don't pay.
Yes, you're remembering our prior conversations
Right.
where we talked about the census demographics, where there are people who are not age eligible, whose income in their home of $58,400 would make them qualify for this, except that they are not age eligible.
And their
Some of
taxes
them are
would
feeding
increase.
children.
Yes.
Right. So it is a difficult place that we find ourselves, and I understand why the state is doing this. It's needed refreshing. It was very cumbersome. So this is more simple. The real crux of it is that by placing the starting point in the statute at the term called the federal adjusted gross income, and for those people who don't file what would have been their federal adjusted gross income, it's repeated in the statute. Who's going to give us that number? We immediately have two classes of filers of the application to us, and we're trying to help the people who don't file an income tax return get to that beginning point, because we're not CPAs.
Yeah.
We can't do that.
And then I said the three things like Lee, the other one is that you said that 60% of your applicants file tax return. A little over that.
I'm guessing.
And then you said, you have to ask at this conference next week, what do we do if your starting point is the adjusted gross income protection? So that, by definition, is another reason, in my opinion, why we do nothing now. And maybe you come back and tell us what you heard from that conference of what you do to the 30 or 40% that don't file taxes. Because if this board needs to move on something, you said we can move on these things before March of '24. But as we sit here in mid-September of '23, I don't see it.
Unlike the resolution that you just passed, right? That's easy. There's minor changes, you don't wish to let it go by, you don't want it to expire. You're gonna do it because you can do it now, and it doesn't matter, there's no rush. This one, I think it is better to, let's sit and wait, let's see if we can learn more. What will we learn? Does that help us make a decision? Or do you do like you did last time, which is, okay, let's do nothing, let's see that impact. Because if you do more, you know you're just gonna be having a bigger impact. Right? Let's see what that impact is. Let's see how that affects so many things that your board is responsible for making financial decisions about. Here's this new definition, shifting your funds around really a little
Well,
bit.
I appreciate, I mean, there's a lot mind on it, and I come from a accounting background. But when you explain what the local opt-ins are, but from your perspective, what you see boots on the ground in your office, of how, hey, traditional Roth IRAs, I think you would unintendedly be hurting the less affluent senior if you opted for that. Those explanations you gave were excellent. I don't want to drag this. I think we're standing pat for now.
Yeah.
Unless, I don't want to speak for the rest of you.
And I'm sorry that was a long presentation.
Long presentation for us to stand back. We're good.
Okay.
No, you did a lot of good analysis now, very in-depth, and obviously a lot of work went into it.
Well, New York State is offering a worksheet for their senior citizens. It just came out a few days ago, and I took a look at it, and it's not complete. It doesn't get you to a FAD sheet. It's not going to allow the person who's, so if you file an income tax return and you're paying an alimony, and that is true in this category of age of applicants, you still have people who are paying alimony or receiving alimony, they wouldn't be able to deduct it.
And
Because there's
this
no
would be-
deductions on it. You
if
file a
somebody-
return, you don't get to deduct it.
If somebody disagreed with what your office did, they could then challenge you to grievance.
Through the Board of Assessment Review.
Right.
Yes, and then they would have to, in a public meeting, discuss
Right.
all of their personal income sources. It's just,
Donna?
we prefer not to go that route.
I'm glad we slotted you last of these three because
It was wise.
it's a lot. And that concludes our town board workshop for the evening. However, For some of us, I'm making a motion under section 105 to enter into executive session under subchapter D, discussions regarding proposed pending or current litigation. That's my motion.
I'll be right back.
Does that mean yes?
Yes, but
Second.
Who's the second?
Bill?
Bill? All in favor?
Aye, and the only invited is town attorney, town board and town attorney.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Conversation.
Dolly, Karen,
This was, I'm sorry, was it D? One D?
D, yes. And as, like we did last week, I'd love to take 15 minutes. Okay? I think we all do. Wow. Oh, that's, you're on the altar. That's cool.
It was really